Welcome, everybody. I have Professor Greg here, and we are going to go over a My Kind of Scum virtual card deck. We haven't done any virtual cards. This is by no means a huge meta-breaking deck, but this is a fun deck. It's a way to learn about virtual cards, a different take on My Kind of Scum, which is a cool objective, actually. But Greg has put together a really cool slide deck. So we're going to do this a little bit differently than we did with Andy. So we're going to go through sort of the starting package and key cards and some options, and there'll be a deck list as well in the video description. But I'm really excited for this. I'm also excited your cat has joined us. It looks like he's trying to get out. I think he can get out. So
yeah, he'll be fine. He'll be fine.
But welcome, Greg. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. I just want to say. So.
I appreciate that, Matt. Look at this. It's Matt and Greg talking about Star Wars, and yet we're not going to talk about the price of a single card today.
No, we're just going to talk about playing the game and virtual cards. So why don't we get started? So this is our cool title slide.
This is our cool title slide. Yeah. You know, I'm really up in my game here. Yeah. So My Kind of Scum. Let's get going. I love this deck. It's really, if we do more of these in the future, all of the decks I play tend to be, not super popular, but decks that I find a lot of fun. And I think this one is a super fun deck that kind of slips under the radar sometimes. So this is the My Kind of Scum objective. This is a Tatooine-based deck. It's focused on Jabba's palace. It's like the idea is to, set up and maintain a stronghold at Jabba's palace while, Jabba kind of sends out his wretched hive of aliens, bounty hunters, smugglers, assassins, and so on, across the galaxy to mess things up for the opponent. So looking at the zero side of the objective, unlike some objectives, the zero side doesn't really give you a lot of benefits, very few. It really mostly just helps you get out these two sites, Tatooine Desert Heart and Tatooine Jabba's Palace. Both of those are 2/1 sites. So this deck starts with 5 force for you and 2 force for the opponent, including, importantly here, Jabba's Palace, which the dark side text you see here says can deploy a Jabba's Palace site from reserve deck, reshuffle during your deploy phase. This is once per turn. So this is like getting Jabba's Palace out is the engine that gets out the rest of your sites in this deck. But looking, before we go to the 7 side, so looking at the rest of the 0 side here, Scum has this like interesting mechanic where you designate a rep that is a unique alien from your deck. This is now your rep, and the rep has like a bunch of interesting mechanics that kick in on the 7 side, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And to flip the objective, basically, you just have to occupy 2 battleground sites or a third with a non-unique alien of your rep species if a non-Tatooine site's on the table. Pretty much 100% of the time you're playing a game, there's going to be a non-Tatooine site on the table. So you should just treat this as, I need to occupy 3 sites, and one of those sites needs to be occupied by a non-unique alien of my rep species. Once you do that, it flips. And once it flips, and you really want to flip in this deck, unlike in other decks, or there's some other decks where like flipping is kind of like not super important. You're just using the objective to like get out a bunch of stuff. With this deck, because there's really not a huge benefit on the 0 side, you really want to flip. Once you flip, there's a bunch of cool stuff that happens. You get to retrieve non-unique aliens of your rep species. You can cancel Force Drains or Battle Destinies by placing copies of your alien rep onto the objective. And if Jabba and Bib are on the table, they don't need to be together at the same site. As long as they're on the table, each of your Battle Destiny draws are +2. And so like any one of these things is kind of pretty good, but I think once you get them all going together at the same time, My Kind of Scum can be like a pretty surprisingly strong deck. And that's like the scaffolding of the objective there, Matt.
Yeah, I will say that the word rep was always confusing to me. It's just short for representative, I guess.
It's just short for representative. I have some slides here in a little bit where like I'll talk about it, but it's basically, again, like any unique alien where their lore is, or in the lore, it specifies their species. So in their lore, it just has to say they're a member of the species. They can now be a rep. And sort of I'll explain the thinking behind that in a little bit.
And there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this because you realize how many unique alien species there are. There's like Abyssins, Trandosians, like there's like a lot of aliens actually. Like it's It's a lot of fun stuff you can do.
Yeah, there's Rhodians, there's Gamorreans, like in the picture here, right? So I think there's really like a lot you can choose, and the PC has made that even easier with some virtual cards as well. Okay, so that's the objective. That's what it starts. I want to like briefly talk about like some key cards that this deck kind of relies on. And so here I have, these are the key cards for the deck. Let me briefly say something about Scum and Villainy. So Scum and Villainy is a really important effect for this deck. When all of your ability on the table is provided only by aliens and independent starships, your aliens and starships are deploy -1, and you retrieve 2 force every time you initiate battle. So this is like huge. Obviously, just looking at this card, you can sort of see that you want to be battling in this deck because you're retrieving 2 force every time you battle. And of course, the -1 to deploy for all of your aliens and starships is really important as well. A quick note here, though, Scum can be altered. So there are people that sometimes play 2 copies of this in their deck just in case it's altered. Very few people play, alter in the meta these days. So that's maybe not something super important to worry about. But it is really important that you maintain control of Jabba's Palance audience chamber. So Scum deploys on the audience chamber, and the light side text on the audience chamber says that if the light side controls, they can use 2 force to cancel Scum and Villainy. And so since Scum and Villainy is really a big engine in this deck, you really need to make sure you're maintaining control of the audience chamber. The other thing to quick note about Scum and Villainy is that it says while all of your ability on table is provided only by aliens and independent starships. And so sometimes people ask questions about how does that interact with something like Mara Jade or Mara Jade with lightsaber, right? These cards or characters that have both an alien icon and an Imperial icon. Well, the way Scum and Villainy works is that it looks to see if your character is an alien, and if it is an alien, you're good. And so it's not checking the Imperial icon on this. And so Mara Jade and other characters like this are totally cool. They don't negate Scum. You can play them, and they're going to be fine with Scum. And then the other 2 really important cards here are Jabba and Bib. So any Jabba persona and any Bib persona are really important because for the 7 side of the objective, to get that +2 to battle destiny, you need these 2 guys on the table. Now, the PC has created a really excellent version. This is a virtual version of Jabba the Hutt from Jabba's Palace. He's got some great game text. When he's with an alien leader, he's immune to attrition, and he can't be targeted by interrupts or weapons. So as long as you have a leader with him, he's like really well protected. You can use a force to double the power of one of your aliens, a non-maintenance alien. And then super important, he can deploy Scum and Villainy from the reserve deck. So that little downward arrow, the little downward caret, that means deploy onto the table from your reserve deck. And so he basically gets to grab Scum and Villainy from the reserve. And then you need some version of Bib. There's a couple different options. There's this option from Jabba's Palace. This Bib is basically nice because he's a leader, right? So it's really important that you have a leader with Jabba. Bib being a leader is nice, and Bib with some other cards I'll talk about here in a second is pullable. So pretty much any persona of Bib is pullable from the reserve deck. And so being able to pull immediately an alien leader to be with Jabba is nice. I like this other Bib, this Bib from Reflections 3. The reason I like him is he's cheaper to deploy. Same power as the other one. He's cheaper to deploy, though. And with Scum and Villainy, he's going to come out for 1. But he's power +3 with Jabba. So he's that power 6. And with Jabba's text of using 1 force to double the power of an alien, Bib is actually 12 power for 1 deploy. Which is just crazy powerful.
That feels like comically bad, like a huge amount of power for like a pretty, comically named. I think one of the greatest named characters in Star Wars, Bib Fortuna, but power for him is like insane.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous that you can make this little Bib 12 power. Of course, like Bib's easy to hit. He's only got 1 ability. So, you got to make sure you protect him. The negative to this, and the reason a lot of people don't use this Bib, is that he's not a leader. And so to get Jabba's text to kick in that makes him immune to attrition and not being able to be targeted by weapons or interrupts, Bib's not going to help you here. So you would need another leader to back him up. And then there actually is another bib worth mentioning. This is a new bib. This is a PC-made bib from the Boba Fett show. Now, at first, it's really confusing why. So some people have started using this bib, but you might be confused at first because if you look at his game text, the first thing it says is Jabba's game text is canceled. So why in the world would you play this bib that immediately cancels Jabba's game text? I think the idea is that once you get Jabba out and once you use him to get scum, the rest of Jabba's game text may be less important than the text on this bib, which is that he adds a destiny to attrition and he adds to Force drains at Tatooine battleground sites. So there's like a case to be made for this. You know, it's really up to you. Whatever you like the best, whatever you think is the most important, you should pick that and kind of run with it. But these are your kind of key cards for the deck here.
How many copies of like bib are you, like 3 or 4 bibs, 2 Jabbas? Like
I use just 1 copy of each. Part of it is making sure you protect them, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, about how you protect them. The other is that there's an effect I'm about to show you in a little bit that actually lets you retrieve cards you lost. And remember, Scum and Villainy is also allowing you to retrieve cards. So, right. You know, while one way of doing this is to have extra copies, another thing to think about is that this deck is going to be retrieving a lot of force. And so if you know, it's a reasonable chance that if you lose these cards, they will cycle back into your deck. But it's true that you want to, you know, in most cases, make sure you have these guys out of the table. And so whatever you need to do that.
All right.
Okay. The next thing, before we sort of talk about how this deck is really going to play, I want to say something about starting effects. So, you know, assuming you're using starting effects, assuming you're using, that is, a starting interrupt that allows you to start 3 starting effects, which you should, because this is a great mechanic that Decipher made to help you get some, you know, more cards on the table at the beginning of the game, speed up the game. So assuming you're doing this, you're playing prepared defenses, you are starting some effects. Here are some ones that I think are really important to use in a deck like this. The first is Jabba's Haven. This is a PC-made card. You know, the really important thing about Jabba's Haven is that it allows you to deploy a system, Nal Hutta. So this is a 2/1 system, so it's 2 extra force for you. It's a -1 to drain for your opponent, so it mitigates the drain there. And importantly, there's really no other way to get a system out in this deck. And you want to also be, you know, up in space, you know, battling with your starship. So this is a nice card to get a system out. And then it also, it's the text right at the end, once per game may retrieve a non-maintenance alien or independent starship into hand. So this is like, this effect also at a really important part of the game will allow you to get a key character or a key ship, whether that's Jabba, whether that's Bib, whether that's just another key character or ship you need, you take them right into hand and you can deploy them. So that's one site you want to use. Next is Power of the Hutt. Power of the Hutt is great because it just allows you to pull from your reserve deck and deploy a bunch of really useful characters, including Bib, who is the most important because he makes the flip side of my kind of scum work with that +2 to destiny. So you get Bib, but it also allows you to pull Boelo. It also allows you to pull Effetman. It also allows you to pull Jabba Sail Barge. It also allows you to pull Jabba Space Cruiser, which is really important because this is a pullable ship. Otherwise, you have to draw into your starships. And this effect Hutt Influence. So this is nice because it just lets you to grab a bunch of stuff from your deck that you might want to be playing. You don't have to necessarily play all of these cards. Bib is the most important, but look at these cards, see if you like them, and remember that once per turn, Power of the Hutt's going to let you grab them. There is a V version of Power of the Hutt that the PC made recently that's also really nice. I've actually just switched over to using it. It lets you grab a lot less. That is, you notice it still lets you grab Bib, which is huge, right? But otherwise, it lets you grab a lot less. But the benefit of this is that while Nal Hutta is on table, which is the site you pull of Jabba's Haven, and while you have an alien at the audience chamber, which you better have an alien at the audience chamber, Reflections 3 Leia may not cancel force drains or reduce your ability. The Reflections 3 Leia is this Leia. This Leia is just a killer for an alien deck. It makes your life very difficult. And so being able to sort of have a built-in canceller for that into the effect is huge. And the effect also lets you activate an extra force once per turn during your opponent's turn. And, you know, anytime you can get an extra force without giving your opponent any force is really great. So I think this is a fun effect the PC made to help the deck. It still lets you get Bib. Is a cost, you know, on either side, but I like this one better. And lastly, no bargain. No bargain this is a kind of iffy one. I think a lot of people who play my kind of scum don't use this. I like this. While no Imperials are at Jabba's palace sites, Rebels are deploy +2. That's, for me, the really huge part of this, especially in the first couple rounds. This deck can be a bit exposed to a kind of quick LS beatdown and forcing your opponent, assuming they're playing Rebels, this is why it's a little bit of a gamble, assuming they're playing Rebels, they're going to come down at +2, which makes your opponent's life a lot difficult in those first couple rounds to come at you. So I really like this card. I use it. Quick note with this card, though, Mara Jade, who worked with Scum and Villainy, will not work with No Bargain. That is, she'll cancel No Bargain, because No Bargain says, well, no Imperials are at any Jabba's palace sites, so it's going to look for an Imperial icon. Mara Jade has one, and so it's going to negate it. You can play Mara Jade at non-Jabba's palace sites, and it's fine, but just keep in mind that you might end up with a character in your hand who is restricted from deploying, not restricted, but will like mess up your starting effect if you deploy her to a Jabba's palace site. Those are the ones I use. There are a couple others you might think about using that some people use. That is Sando Aqua Monster, which lets you draw a destiny, put it on the card, and lets you substitute that destiny at a later point in time during a battle or something like that. This can be useful to get like a guaranteed destiny draw or to get around destiny delimiters. Crush the Rebellion's one some people think about starting because it cancels Clash of Sabers, which can be a killer for this deck. Battle Order and First Strike combo is a really nice one because not only does it make your opponent use Force to play interrupts during battle, but you battle for free. And in a deck that really likes to battle, saving a Force a turn or even a couple Force each turn can be really nice as well. So I think all of these can be nice choices. I think Battle Order and First Strikes may be the best if you don't like No Bargain. Okay. Moving on. So that's like your starting setup. Before we sort of talk about the play itself, it's worth saying something about your reps. So this deck has you choose a non-unique or a unique character where their lore specifies their species. And really kind of this is up to you, whoever you like. The PC has made some fun virtual versions of cards that you might want to choose that give a boost to their non-unique counterparts. So Ortug, Hondo, Poe, they all give kind of deploy modifications or forfeit modifications or power modifications to their non-unique, Weequay, Gamorrean counterparts. So those might be fun choices. Ethetmon and Greedo might be nice choices since you might be using them in your deck anyway. And so why not, pick a card that you're already going to be using in your deck. Generally, the only restriction is there just has to be non-uniques, Rhodians, Jevons, Gamorreans, whatever. And these days, which you choose is actually far less important than it used to be because the PC has made this pretty cool card called Alien Mob, which just has your rep species. And so this is just like kind of like utility alien that can be any species you want. It just matches with your representative. And it's got some cool text about retrieving a copy of your rep when it's deployed and about retrieving or taking a force. I'll say something about this in a little bit, but basically saves you a force when you're retrieving non-unique aliens of your rep species. I guess last thing about this, you've got your rep. You want to play a couple copies of that because, this mechanic of being able to cancel battle destinies by placing a copy of your rep on the objective is really useful. So you probably want to have maybe 3 or 4 copies of your rep. For your non-unique alien, in the old days, these used to be kind of swarm decks. You'd have Mayo and you'd have like 12 Abyssins or whatever it is. These days, you're not really doing that. You're just putting in enough of these cards to get your flip and to get some retrieval going. And so you might have like 4 copies of Alien Mob. Or if you're me who uses Hondo, you might have like 2 copies of Alien Mob and 2 others. But you really don't need more than like 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys. You don't need a whole ton of them. Okay, so that's your rep, that's your non-unique aliens. Moving on to like the early game, how to think about like the first couple rounds of this game, which in this deck is really thinking about setting up and flipping your objective because there's not really a lot of power to this deck until you're flipped. So the first couple rounds are really thinking about how do I get myself flipped as quickly as possible and put myself in a strong position. So imagine we're at turn 1. You've got your Jabba's Palace out. You've also got your Desert Heart out, which I just don't have on the screen. You've got your objective. You've got your starting effects. The first thing you want to do is you want to use Jabba's Palace game text to deploy Jabba's Palace site, which should be the audience chamber, right? Because the audience chamber is where all the stuff is happening. You then use the audience chamber to, assuming you don't have them in hand, the audience chamber lets you once per game deploy an alien from the reserve deck. So you want to use that to deploy your Jabba the Hutt from the reserve deck. Now you've got your Jabba the Hutt out at the audience chamber, and you can use his text to dig and grab Scum and Villainy and deploy Scum and Villainy on the audience chamber. So now you've got your audience chamber, you got your Jabba, you got your Scum and Villainy. Now your aliens are deploying -1. So now you want to use your Power of the Hutt and throw your Bib down on the table with Jabba. Back him up at the audience chamber, get your Bib, which is going to be, an important 7-side mechanic for you. And, you've got this really nice pull chain that has allowed you to grab most of your key cards on turn 1.
That's like because you're starting with 5 force and whatever the opponent gets you. So you're going to be able to get Jabba down plus Bib, plus maybe 1 to double his power still, because your opponent's probably going to get at least 1 force.
Yeah, good. So that's right. You start with 5. That's enough to get Jabba and Bib. You want to sort of think about if your opponent, most of the time your opponent's going to give you some force, unless you're playing like Throne Remains or something like that.
Yeah.
But if your opponent's giving you a few force, that's really nice. If you can have 1 to double Bib, double Bib's power, and then maybe another force for like an Imperial Barrier or some other defensive play, that'd be really great. But yes, it'd be good to have a little bit of extra force saved up here to protect them if need be and make it unappealing for your opponent to come down. Also, don't forget to use your Jabba's Haven to grab your Nal Hutta and also throw that out. And so now, by the way, notice between Nal Hutta, the audience chamber, Jabba's Palace, and the other site you start, you've got at least 9 force for your next round, even if your opponent has given you nothing. So you should be in a pretty good force situation by round 2. One other sort of thing to note about this kind of pull chain, you want to kind of make sure that pull chain is all in the deck before you start looking for it. So one thing that's useful to do, if you have something like this that I'll talk about in a minute, like an Abyssin ornament that lets you look through your deck and take a non-unique alien into hand from reserve deck, this is something you might want to do at the very start of the turn. So that is before you've done anything, after you've activated force, use this to grab a non-unique alien. You've got enough in there that you're almost guaranteed to have one. And while you're in there, look for the audience chamber, look for Scum, look for Bib, look for Jabba, look for Nal Hutta, make sure they're in there before you try to search for them. Because if you search for something and you fail, your opponent can look at your reserve deck, right? So you want to kind of keep that from happening, make sure everything's in there. If everything isn't in there, that is, if you look and Jabba's not there, Scum and Villainy not there, that means they're in your force pile. Take up all your force. Do not leave any force. You absolutely, the worst thing that can happen in this deck is that you like leave 1 force to grab an interrupt or something like that. And that force is your Jabba or your Scum and you're like screwed. So keep that in mind.
It's a good suggestion. I feel like that sometimes stuff being trapped in the force pile, and I guess, the Jabba's Palace is during your deploy phase. You can't do that at the beginning of the turn.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay, what do we got next?
So that's your turn 1. You're set up pretty good. Your turn 2, you could already think about flipping your objective. You're generating at least 9 force, maybe over 10 or 11, depending on what your opponent has given you. This is potentially enough to flip. And so the first thing you want to do is use Jabba's Palace again to dig for another site. I like Jabba's Palace Audience Chambers. It's another 2/1 site. It's a -1 to force drain for your opponent. So it's like not a huge cost if they take control of it. And it's got some cool game text that I'll talk about in a minute. And so supposing you need to get 3 sites to get your objective flipped, one with a non-unique rep of your alien species, you throw your Weequay at the lower passages, let's say. You throw another character at the lower passages. You now occupy 3 sites. Boom, the objective flips. Now, notice, though, you've got this like lone Weequay sitting at the lower passages. You've got your, Prince Xizor alone at Jabba's Palace. While you need to occupy 3 to get the flip, you only need to continue to maintain presence at 2 to maintain your flip. And now here's a really fun thing about the lower passages game text. During your move phase, your aliens may move between here and any Jabba's Palace site. So what that means is your character can move from there to any Jabba's palace site, or from any Jabba's palace site to there, no matter how far away it is, as a regular use of the Force. And so a nice little thing you can do is you can use one Force and just slide Xizor right over. You've got now you're at 2 sites. You're a bit more backed up, right? I mean, if you've got more Force and more characters to throw down, you can of course do that, potentially even backing up Jabba and Bib more as well. But importantly, your objective has flipped. And now this deck becomes a lot of fun, right? Your aliens with Scum, your aliens are deploy -1. You're retrieving 2 Force when you initiate battle. Your battle destinies are at +2. You can cancel battle destinies or Force drains by placing a copy of your rep on this objective. Although note, I think it's rarely worth using that mechanic to cancel a Force drain. I think it's much more important to save those copies of your rep to cancel a battle destiny. And you can retrieve non-unique reps of your alien species. So there's just a lot of fun stuff here. Now, a couple things to note about this. Because this deck really thrives on battling and retrieving kind of in the mid game, it's rarely in your best interest to drain early on, especially because your opponent is likely going to be playing the defensive shield that makes it so that you have to pay 3 Force to drain unless you occupy both in space and on the ground. And so if you can drain for free, of course, do it. But if you have to pay to drain, it's not worth the draining 1. It's much more important to get your stuff set up to get your flip. You should also, kind of for the same reason, be wary about battling before you flip. Because you don't get your +2, you can't cancel battle destinies until after you flip. That's really when this deck becomes strong. Don't get sucked into like battling your opponent, at some other site where they're draining you too early on. You're going to retrieve Force with Scum and Villainy when you battle later. Better to take a drain or 2 early on to get yourself set up and be in a sort of better position to battle once you're flipped. And I guess finally, the first turn or 2 in this deck can feel like very exposed, right? You want to get Jabba out early. You want to flip early, but the earlier you get out Jabba and Bib without backup, the more you risk a kind of like early beatdown and the loss of some key characters. But if you wait too long until you have like more Force to really back them up to put them down, when you try to do those digs out of your reserve deck, the more cards in your Force pile, the less likely they are to be in your reserve deck. So there's this kind of tension. So you want to get them out early, right? But you want to protect them. And so you want to make sure that you've got cards in your deck that can protect them when you do this. So the next thing is protecting these characters. Now, here's a bunch of interrupts that I think are really useful for this. Standard ones that I think many people are going to be familiar with: Imperial Barrier, right? Prevent your just deployed character from battling. Stunning Leader for 1 Force. You exclude basically all leaders and characters' ability greater than 2 from the battle. That might sort of cancel the battle entirely because it leaves no one on either side, or it leaves just one character on one side, or potentially you get a kind of weird battle with some scrubs. But generally, this is a way to protect your characters. None Shall Pass is a super fun card. It's kind of iffy. It's maybe a 61st card. It's a used interrupt. It's a 5 destiny, but it only targets rebels. But what it does is if your opponent has deployed a rebel to Jabba's palace, that card goes back to your opponent's hand, and the Force they used to deploy it is gone. And so they got to redeploy it the next turn for another use of that Force. And if you've got no bargain out, they just had to deploy that character for +2. It's back in their hand, and they got to deploy it for +2 again the next turn. So super powerful if it works. Of course, your opponent might not be playing rebels. And then a couple other useful cards: Ceasefire, cancels, stops your opponent from using weapons during a battle. Gick is, of course, the all-purpose damage soaker up if you get a kind of early beatdown. All of these are really useful cards, and you really want to have at least one of these in your hand, turn 1 if you can.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, with that, Matt?
No, go ahead.
Well, so that's it for that. Another thing to say about the deck is like your Force generation. Now, I've already showed like a bunch of ways to get Force. That's 9 Force, I think, that I've shown you to get. That's like not as much as you would like to have in this deck. And so you want to think about other ways of generating Force. Now, remember, Jabba's Palace allows you to pull any Jabba's Palace site. And there's a bunch of other nice 1-0 sites that you could potentially use. So these are sites that give you 1 Force. They give your opponent no Force. So these are pretty good sites to pull. Most people who play my kind of scum don't use these. I don't use these either, partly because you know, remember, you could only do this once per turn. And so by the time you're getting to these, it's a kind of a few turns in. And another site that most people use in my kind of scum deck is this Jabba's Sail Barge Passenger deck, which is the 2/0 site. And what you can pull with a V card that the PC made, they made a Twi'lek Advisor V card that if the audience chamber is on table, you can deploy the passenger deck from your reserve deck. And so the nice thing about this is if you play, for instance, like 4 Twi'lek Advisors, you're very likely to get one in the first round or two, which means you're very likely to get this passenger deck out really early. And so you've got another 2/0 site maybe on turn 1 or turn 2, instead of having to wait till turn 3 or turn 4 to get this other force generation going. And this virtual card also lets you deploy alien leaders or Twi'leks to the audience chamber. So it's got some extra fun stuff as well. It's a used interrupt. It's a 5 destiny. It's a pretty good utility card, and it gets you this 2/0 site. So up to you how you want to do it. I actually don't use this. I just go without it, and I kind of struggle with the force because I just don't like putting in so many kind of site grabbers in my deck. But most people do use this. All right, so you've got your setup, you've got your flip, you've thought about your force generation, you've thought about how to protect your characters. Now you're moving into the middle part of this game where all the fun stuff is happening and where you really want to just be battling a lot, right? Even just a couple turns where your opponent gets no destiny and you draw destiny at +2, potentially more than 1 destiny at +2, you're retrieving force. This can be a real killer to come back from. You could potentially have a huge blowout battle by turn 3 or like turn 4 in this deck. So imagine it's a few turns later. You've still got Jabba and Bib at the audience chamber. You've lost a Weequay. You've canceled a destiny with Hondo already. You've got a couple guys at the audience chamber. And let's say your opponent has some characters at the audience chamber, or sorry, at the lower passages. So your opponent has a couple characters at the lower passages. You're going to want to battle in this turn. So you activate your force. In your control phase, the first thing to remember doing is that your objective, because you're on the 7 side, allows you to retrieve a non-unique member of your your rep species from the lost pile. So don't forget to do that. Remember that if you're playing defensive shields, your opponent is very likely to have played this shield, which forces you to pay force to retrieve. So for every force you want to retrieve, you need to pay a force to do that. So just keep that in mind. You're likely going to have to pay a force to retrieve this Weequay, but you know, in many cases, you're going to want to do that. Although keep in mind, this alien mob character has this really nice mechanic where fearless and incentive is on the table. And you've just retrieved a force, you can take a force from your use pile and put it onto your force pile. So basically, you use a force, you retrieve the card, and then you take that retrieved card and put it back in your force pile. So you just got that force retrieval for free. And if you're playing without shields, you actually just gained a card in your force pile. So Alien Mob is super fun for that reason. Don't forget to use their text. Okay, you now move to your deploy phase. You're going to want to battle here, right? So note, you've got this Hondo. He's sitting on your objective. So, and you want to deploy something here. Hondo's a pretty good card, and even if you've got a Hondo in your hand, you want to, because Hondo, your rep deploys from your objective as from hand, you want to take this Hondo, you want to deploy him from the objective, get him out at that site. Right? Save all the Hondos in your hand to cancel destinies or whatever rep you're playing, right? So now you've got your Hondo at the site. You initiate battle. You go to your battle phase. You initiate battle. Remember that Scum and Villainy now kicks in. You can retrieve 2 force. Although remember, if you're shielded, to make sure that you've saved enough force to pay the 2 to retrieve. Which, again, sometimes you're going to have to kind of make a decision. Do I have enough force this turn to deploy everything I want and retrieve? Or do I deploy a little less to make sure I retrieve? Or I deploy more and forgo retrieving? These are some decisions you're going to have to make. But assuming you've gotten past that, you go through the battle. Remember that because you're on the 7 side, Jabba and Bib at the table, you're drawing at +2. So you've drawn a 4. That 4 becomes a 6. Your opponent draws a 5. They draw this Wisa, let's say. Now, assuming you've got a Hondo in hand, remember, you take this Hondo, you put it down to the objective, you cancel your opponent's destiny. So now you've got the situation where you've drawn a destiny at +2, you've canceled your opponent's destiny, right? And now, hopefully that's been, that itself is pretty cool. Then you go to your forfeit phase. if you have to forfeit anything, let's say they were able to draw 2 destinies, and so you have to forfeit for attrition, or they had more power than you, and so you have to forfeit to soak up some battle damage, you absolutely want to soak up the battle damage by forfeiting this Hondo. Why do you want to forfeit this Hondo, Matt?
Sorry, I was on mute. Because you have a copy of him on your objective.
You have a copy of him on your objective, and the worst thing that can happen in this deck is that you get your reps stuck on your objective and they're just clogging up your objective and you can't actually use them. You want to be cycling these guys. So you put him down, you battle with him, you forfeit him. The next turn you can deploy another Hondo from your objective, initiate battle, and then ideally retrieve that Hondo. So you want to cycle, you want to deploy, forfeit, and cycle those guys back in is the idea. And so this is like roughly what you want to be doing mid-game. Lots of battling, lots of retrieving, lots of canceling. And so kind of with that in mind, when you're thinking about constructing this deck, you want to be thinking about like characters and starships that are kind of going to work synergistically with the, you know, all the fun stuff that my kind of scum does. So you want to be thinking about aliens or droids, because droids aren't going to mess up the text on Scum and Villainy. Aliens, droids that do fun and cool things, right? Those fun and cool things can be things like Forlom with Concussion Rifle adding a battle destiny if he's with Jabba or Zuckuss. And note that text with Zuckuss works on Zuckuss and Mist Hunter, the ship. It doesn't have to be, it's just any Zuckuss persona. Or IG-88 with Riot Gun, who's cool because he's got a weapon, but also because he adds a battle destiny with a bounty hunter. Boba Fett, Bounty Hunter from Reflections 3, the crazy broken card, right? That is going to add a destiny with your alien or 2 destinies if with your another bounty hunter. He's a maintenance card. There's a cost to him, but just super, super powerful. You've got your Jango Fett, which is a PC virtual card that adds a destiny with opponent Jedi or maintenance cards or with permanent weapon cards. Lady Proxima is a fantastic card that PC made that adds a destiny if she's with 2 other aliens, and also has this great mechanic where during your control phase, you draw the top 3 cards of your reserve deck. If one's an alien, you take that alien into hand. So she's a great way to get aliens into your hand and out of your deck. So these are all like good destiny adder cards. Remember, all of your destinies are at +2. So you draw a couple destinies in a battle, each at +2, and that's a killer. Other fun characters are just people that do fun things. Boelo cancels a battle destiny. Greedo can deploy as a react. He's a bounty hunter. Opponent has to fire weapons, has to use a force to fire weapons at the same site. If they're going to use a Sorry About the Mess, they have to target Greedo instead of one of your better characters. So he's a great utility character, virtual card. Chokk's like a criminally underused card. I think he boosts the defensive value of your alien leaders. He's power +3 when defending a battle. He keeps your characters from having their forfeit value reduced if they're hit with lightsabers. Chal Benkin's super fun. He lets you, when deployed, take an alien into hand, a non-unique alien. He makes your aliens deploy -1 to same and adjacent sites. Dr. Chelli is really cool. She deploys free to an unoccupied site. She's a spy. And a really cool thing she does is you can take any card from your lost pile and move it to the top of your lost pile. If it's a droid, you can take it into hand. So certain cards like Forlom, IG-88, P-59, you can just take them directly into hand. But what's really cool is if you're about to initiate battle, you can take a key card that's like kind of buried low in your lost pile, put it at the top of your lost pile, initiate battle, and then retrieve it with Scum and Villainy immediately. So she's like super fun in this deck. So this is the kind of thing you want to be thinking about. Alien characters that have like fun text that's going to work with the objective.
I always forgot about Chokk. Chokk is I've never read his game text before, but he's like,
dude, he's so fun. Like very few people use him, but like he's just got like his like, I mean, his forfeit is like terrible, right? But like he's got such fun text, and I don't know why more people don't use him, especially in decks like this. Maybe it's because not a lot of people play decks like this, but so okay, starships. You also want to have a space package. There's a couple good ships you can use here. Remember, independent starships. Dengar and Punishing One is good because he adds 1 to total battle destiny for each opponent's starship present. He also cancels opponent's immunity to attrition. So he's like canceling the immunity to attrition of a home 1 or something like that, which can be tough to break the immunity of otherwise. You've got IG-88 in 2000, which adds a battle destiny when you initiate battle. So that's a way to get an extra battle destiny. You've got this Ellison Hinthra, which is nice. It's of the ships I've mentioned, it's the first one where you can add a pilot and a couple passengers. Importantly, once per game, you can use a force to deploy a smuggler aboard. And there's like a couple cool smugglers you might want to think about using in this deck. So Outer Rim Scouts are great. They're super cheap to deploy. They're deploying -1 of Scum and -1 if they deploy to an independent starship. So they actually come out for free entirely. They add 3 to power of the ship you're putting them on. They can draw Battle Destiny if unable to otherwise. They're non-unique, so there's some fun stuff you can do with any cards that grab non-uniques. They can grab Outer Rim Scouts. Wooof is super cool. He comes down super cheap. He adds 3 to power, and he subtracts 1 from each of your opponent's battle and weapon destiny draws. That's a virtual card. Ponda Baba, there's a virtualized version of him, which is really fun, where he adds a destiny to attrition with a smuggler. That's if he's with your smugglers, like Wooof or Outer Rim Scout, but also with opponent smugglers, like Lando or something like that. So he's a super fun utility card that pairs well with these guys as well. So these are all like really good smugglers to potentially deploy on Ellison Hinthra. Jabba Space Cruiser, which there's a virtualized version. It's pullable by Power of the Hutt if you play the original non-V version. When deployed, you can deploy an alien leader aboard from reserve deck. Lady Proxima is a nice one here, potentially some other ones. So, think about some alien leaders to have in your deck that are going to work with Jabba Space Cruiser if you play it. And Zuckuss the Mist Hunter, which is, obviously great. You got to, yeah, I mean, what deck doesn't play Zuckuss and Mist Hunter these days? But makes your opponent have to have greater than 6 ability to draw Battle Destiny. So these are all good ships to have. A quick note, if you're playing the new Power of the Hutt, you can no longer grab Jabba Space Cruiser with it. And so if you can't grab Jabba Space Cruiser, you might think about using First Light instead of that, which is similar to Jabba Space Cruiser, but allows you to add 3 pilots and 6 passengers instead of just the 1 pilot and 6 passengers. And if you can't pull either one, you might as well use First Light. Although I will say, this is a V card, there is interrupt that is a puller for First Light if you wanted to play it. But even if you don't use the puller, if you can't pull Jabba Space Cruiser, you might as well use First Light, I think. So those are the kinds of ships you should be thinking about. One last other set of cards to think about is just a couple fun interrupts that I haven't mentioned yet. Jabba's Through With You and Shattered Hope are both Destiny adders. Jabba's Through With You is a used interrupt, and it's a 5 Destiny, which is really nice, but it's a bit specific with its usage in that if your bounty hunter has fired a weapon, you can add a Battle Destiny. Shattered Hope, just general, add a Battle Destiny. And remember, when you're drawing at +2, this can be like super powerful. First Strike, a really nice effect, especially if you kind of have drawn it at some point earlier in the game and you hold on to it and wait to deploy it at the perfect time when your opponent hasn't saved any force. First Strike, not only when you initiate battle, allows you to retrieve a force and pings your opponent a force, but your opponent has to use a force to play interrupts. And at a key moment, this might stop your opponent from using like a Hugix to soak up battle damage or to play other important interrupts. Although note, First Strike is a double-edged sword because when your opponent initiates battle, the text also hits you. It's going to ping you and allow them to retrieve. And Den of Thieves allows you to cancel Force Drains by putting non-unique aliens onto it. If you can draw Den of Thieves early and put it down, it's really nice because your rep aliens are going to work and your Outer Rim Scouts are going to work here too to soak up drain damage.
All right, bring us home. How do we win this thing?
How do you win? Okay, one thing before we win, here's a couple ways to make sure you get the cards you need. Abyssin Ornament, Goo-ta Solo, in my deck Bantha Fodder, because I'm playing Hondo, are all ways to get aliens into your hand. So Abyssin Ornament, take a non-unique alien into hand from reserve deck. Because it's the combo with Wounded Wookiee, on the 7 side of this objective, your Wounded Wookiee is +3 to Destiny. So this is actually a Destiny 5 card that lets you, it's used and it lets you grab your non-unique aliens. Goo-ta Solo is a virtual card, lets you grab Rhodians, including Greedo, or non-unique aliens. It also breaks the cover of Undercover Spies, cancel Nabran Lead. Bantha Fodder is really nice because it lets you grab any Weequay, not just the non-unique ones, so that includes Hondo. Force, Push, and Point Men are both virtual cards, which basically allow you to dig into your Force pile and grab any card you need. Force Push is lost, but you can use it at the very beginning, right after you activate Force when your Force pile is at its largest. Point Man is used, but you can only use it at the end of your turn during your draw phase. So it's less valuable in that regard, but is also a used interrupt. So these are all ways to get like important cards into your hand. All right, mid game, you've been battling, you've been retrieving. The game's not over yet. You're in the late game stage. If you haven't won already, hopefully you have. What should you do? One thing you should be thinking about doing in the really late game is sending your characters out on suicide missions. So just one thing to know here, in the late game, when no one is generating a lot of force, the reserve deck is depleted, you know, a really powerful move is to just throw one character down who can draw Battle Destiny on their own. Assume your opponent has characters at Jabba's palace. They're draining you 2, right? They've got like, let's say 1 or 2 or even 3 characters. You can throw down one lowly character, an Aurra Singh, right, who can draw Battle Destiny on their own. And remember, you initiate battle. You retrieve 2 force with Scum and Villainy. You cancel a Battle Destiny with by placing your Hondo on the objective. And so even though it's only one character, that one character allows you to retrieve 2 force. It cancels your opponent's Battle Destiny. You can very easily clear 1 or even 2 or even 3 characters from a site. And potentially, if you're lucky, your Aurra even gets to stay on the table. But worst case, you're likely to forfeit this one character and not take any overflow. And it's totally worth it. You sacrifice one character, you've gained back 2 force, and you've cleared your opponent from a site. You've removed their drain. And it's like totally a great trade to do. And it's a really powerful thing to do at the end when you actually just don't have a lot of force to do things and your opponent doesn't either. And so this is a really good late game strategy. To pull it off, just make sure you're thinking about characters who can draw Destiny on their own. There aren't a ton of aliens that do this. The PC has made a couple of good virtual cards that do this, like Hondo, like Aurra, like Zam, like Kira. But P59 and Xizor Decipher cards also do this as well. You just want to be like scanning for cards that either have 4 ability or have text that allows them to draw Destiny on their own if you're trying to pull off the strategy towards the end of the game where you kind of just send solo characters out on suicide missions. And that's it. That's the deck. That's the early game strategy, you know, building up to that flip, protecting your characters, the mid game strategy of battling and retrieving, and the kind of hopefully you're done, but if you're not, that kind of late game strategy of being willing to sacrifice a character for the sake of clearing a site.
Honestly, Greg, it's a lot of fun to see alien decks because I think they don't get a lot of love. I think it's like, you know, Imperial, and so seeing the sort of variety of aliens out there, like all these Weequays, or I have maybe a bunch of those Weequay guards in my common pile. I just have never even
these like Weequay marksmen and guards and skiff masters. There's like a whole bunch of them, right? I like them. I mean, honestly, I just play this deck because I love Hondo. I just think he's super cool. So that's like the reason I use Hondo. It's like not for any kind of strategic reason. I just think he's fun. Like you should just play whatever character you think is fun. And there are like, I think there's a lot of different ways to build this. There's a lot of different aliens that you can use. So I think there's, you know, quite a lot of variability in how this deck can be constructed and that you can have a lot of fun with it, as long as you're sort of remembering that this deck really wants to be kind of battling and retrieving during that mid game. Really everything else is sort of open to you to how you play it.
Which I think that's what makes this game fun, is the interactions and sort of battling. It's sort of like the heartbeat of this game, what makes it really enjoyable. And so this is a fun build. Greg, thanks for doing this, man. This is a really incredible tutorial here, and hopefully sort of a soft intro for people that are V-card curious, that are seeing some of these images. Like myself, even I look and I'm like, oh, wow, these are some interesting texts, and it's nice to see some different cards and aren't just like the same Decipher era ones that I feel like we've done a lot of retro videos on.
Yeah, and I think what's nice about this is that like it's, you know, there are certainly V cards in my build, like a fair number, but like it's not the majority. You know, I don't know the exact number, maybe a quarter of the deck, maybe even less. Like, you know, this is a Decipher. You know, I actually used to play my kind of Scum when I was like a kid, and I had a Mayo Abyssin deck. And so it's still, you know, the Decipher objective. I think it's still mostly Decipher cards, but the PC has done like a really nice job of creating, I think, cards that, whether intentionally or not, just work really well with this deck and make it a lot more fun than it might be otherwise.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, everybody. Thanks for hanging out, Greg. Thanks for doing this. We're gonna do
this was I mentioned this to you before. I had like an unreasonable amount of fun just putting together the slides for this. So hopefully we do more of these.
So if folks have sort of commented on a different format or different ideas for this, There will be sort of a skeleton deck list in the video description. If you want to check that out, sort of some ideas there. But,
I will provide my deck list, but you should just use it as a guideline. You shouldn't think about it as like, this is the only way to build this deck.
Yeah. So a really fun one to tinker with a bit. But thanks for hanging out. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'll be back with some more virtual card decks to sort of start exploring this format a bit more. But we'll catch everybody next time.